Welcome to the second episode of the Customer Retention Show. I am very delighted to have a esteemed panel of guests, and probably delighted is the word for today. I'd love the guests to introduce themselves, but just before we do that, my name's Tom Burrell. I run a consultancy called Retention Coach, and this podcast deep dives into the drivers of retention in specific verticals. The first episode covered publishing, and this episode we're focusing on B2B SaaS at all levels. So first up, I would love Claire to introduce herself.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Clare Knight, and I run a weekly newsletter called the Onboarding Lab. I've worked in SaaS for over 10 years now, specifically B2B SaaS. And for the majority of that, my focus has been onboarding within customer success, but more recently, just onboarding. I am a bit of an onboarding nerd. I will preach about it until people start actually actioning what I'm talking about. I do some coaching and some consulting on the side as well, but my main goal is helping people experiment with onboarding so that you can actually get to a world-class onboarding experience. So that's my focus, and that's what I preach about every week.
Amazing. Awesome to have you on, Claire. Mike, do you want to go?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Tom. So I'm Mike Migilore. I'm the customer value guy. I run a consultancy where I help businesses acquire the right customers, keep them for longer, get them to buy more and cost less. I've worked at a variety of B2B SaaS businesses over the last 5 years, but my career in marketing has been going for the last 15 as it included a variety of businesses in different verticals. So publishing, banking, SaaS, and insurance, as well as a couple of FMCG businesses thrown in there. I'm also about to start a new interim role at the Financial Times, running their pricing and proposition team. So that's
Amazing. Yeah, it's great to have you on. And you've got a lot of experience that runs in subscription, that runs across B2B SaaS, but also into consumer, which I think provides a really interesting angle. So last but not least, Ramli, would you like to go introduce yourself?
Of course, yeah. Thanks so much for the invite. My name is Ramli John. I'm the founder of Delight Path. It's a consultancy around product onboarding. So I help mainly B2B SaaS companies turn more of their users into happy paying customers. I'm the author of Product-Led Onboarding. I mainly work with product-led growth. I previously worked with Wes Bush at Product-Led and writing a new book about B2B onboarding, which with a primary focus around product. So excited.
Amazing. It's a privilege to have you here. 6 weeks, right, until your book's out. So yeah, exciting. Right, so let's get into it then. So in my work, I talk a lot about the retention hierarchy of needs, and at the base of that hierarchy is the product proposition. So that's what you offer and to who. In the middle of that hierarchy is who you acquire. So if you acquire a lot of poor quality customers, of course, they're not going to stay around very long. And then at the top of the hierarchy is how you handle those critical moments, those moments of truth. Those are the moments that make or break retention. But so let's start at the kind of the base of that pyramid, Mike. Can you talk about the importance of proposition design in the context of retention and B2B SaaS and your experience of why it's so important?
Okay. I think you want to create opportunities to retain on purpose. So by design, effectively. And I think it's super easy to say, really hard to do, because it involves getting the right product market price fit. Lifetime value is a profit metric, and it's driven both by what you sell and how often you sell it, i.e. your proposition and your ability to create recurring revenue. So I think to build a proposition that retains by design and also acquires, actually, for that matter. So you can't just build it and expect them to come, as some believe. You have to do the work, as they say. So figure out who your ideal customer is, asking what their pain points are, why they have them, and what do they value. But unfortunately, it doesn't end there, right? So you need to be much more systematic than that and examine your own internal capabilities to determine what you can offer, how well you might be able to offer it, to relieve those customers' pain points as cheaply as possible, or if you can't do it cheaply, to develop and build those costs into your model. You also need to understand the market in which this product will exist, because as John Donne would have said, no man is an island, right? So everything exists in context. And so you need to understand the market in which it will exist, but also importantly, you need to realize what you're doing better about it, about whatever your proposition is. And finally, as the customer value guy, it is actually a systematic process that I use with my clients. I call it a compass. I used it at a B2B SaaS information services provider for the defense sector called Shepherd Media. And we built them a new proposition around their flagship product, and it was built around their target customer needs, exactly as I just mentioned, like figuring out exactly what their pain points were, why they had them, what did they value about that type of product. And then priced it for their business. So introduced a pricing strategy that was tiered, which is of course like pretty standard in SaaS, but also importantly aligned to what they could do as a business in terms of the different feature sets at each tier, what they could feasibly offer, and then what they needed to invest in down the line in their product roadmap in order to take that to market and therefore charge more at a higher tier. And then finally, what they were doing better than their competitors, which of course then also finds its way into overarching marketing messaging. And it's all, I make it sound like it's a neat little box, but of course it was very messy. But it was great because it helped them improve their revenue year on year by 50%.
Yeah, amazing. And I feel like pricing and like proposition structure, like across sectors, is like a whole other podcast in itself. But it's absolutely critical, right, to retention in B2B SaaS. Like moving on to the next layer, I'll just stay with you, Mike, as well. Just moving on to the next layer, and you've got kind of a lot of experience of this as well in publishing and with your forthcoming role and previous roles and so on. But the second layer, so who you acquire, like in publishing, they do a lot of low-cost trials, right? $1 free trials, and other industries do as well. But if you acquire a lot of low-value customers, obviously that can impact on LTV and profitability. So, like in your view and your experience and the work that you've done, how do you acquire for long-term customer lifetime value in B2B SaaS, and like what mindset shift is required to move away from a focus on like acquisition at all costs towards retention-led growth?
I think if you build for the customer, then it becomes a question of ensuring that they understand the product, they know about the product, and they see its potential value. And that is, of course, different for different types of customer, but that's why we segment, right? So we are able to articulate that in an effective way. But this is where having a plan, I think, is also really handy. So like no matter how good your product market price fit, you're going to have churn. And it's something that I think a lot of people in our field have trouble stomaching, right? Like, but it is going to happen.
Yeah, CEOs have trouble stomaching.
Yeah. Well, you're lucky if your CEO knows what that word means, I think.
Yeah.
I think I've got a story about that later, actually. But I think ultimately you have to price it in and build a proposition that can be effectively varied to maximize your capture of the demand curve. Like I was just saying with Shepherd, right? So we built a tiered proposition portfolio that helped maximize the type of people that we were acquiring and therefore retaining. My point of view is that like low entry price point trials are not inherently bad, particularly for churn. But I think the way businesses deal with them are often in a reactive and trigger happy way, i.e. like we'll just give them more discounts, but only after they've demonstrated that they're not getting value from the product, and that's the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah.
So if you think about freemium B2B products or other, like Canva, which also has a tier proposition portfolio, there's usually a huge price hike once the trial is over, and this is nothing but poor planning.
It's just a cliff, right?
Yeah, it's a huge jump up. And you see it both in B2B and B2C. It's just like not realistic. And I think, if you're going to use low price trials, then you should also be using step pricing. It's a no-brainer in my view. And I think the reason that that's a good solution is because you're planning for churn. So you're doing step pricing is a proactive tool that you can use to manage the volume of your customer base rather than something that's reactive. So Canva, they don't do that very well. So they will offer a discount at point of cancellation. and it would probably be more cost effective and also more conducive to offer that proactively, or to have step pricing built in. Like, so that's my point. Like, plan for churn, don't just react to it.
Yeah. Perfect. So retention does very much start with acquisition. It starts with how you price the products. Building step pricing all makes perfect sense to me.
Tom, can I just jump in here? Just
please go for it, Claire. Yes.
Point.
Yeah.
So my background is definitely from a startup, B2B startup world.
Yeah.
And I just want to kind of make a point that if you are also in that world, it's so common that this is not something you figure out. And for like, you have to go through so many different iterations to get to product market fit and various other, get to the step pricing that makes sense. Even segmenting customers. Like, if you are a startup with a handful of customers, or, just not enough of a kind of breadth of customer base to be able to segment effectively, then just be aware that it's good to have this stuff in mind as a startup, but it's okay to go through variations where it doesn't work, and you have to just keep iterating until it does. That's just my experience from a startup perspective. Definitely agree with everything Mike's saying about if you're more established.
I think Claire makes an excellent point. Like, I make it sound really easy. It's not. Like, it's definitely something that you're going to get wrong before you get it right.
Yeah, definitely. Especially in that startup world, you might do as much research as you can, and you have to kind of get the product to market quickly, and then how do you price is often trial and error. But I think quite often you see like startups not even aware of these principles, though, right? So it's about having that in mind, I think.
And that's the thing. I think working with these types of tools or frameworks like the compass that I mentioned it's a way to decrease your time to efficacy.
Yeah. Definitely. If you have that
it's
framework in mind,
it's not a silver bullet.
It's like you don't know what you don't know, right? So you kind of need to know what you need to test.
I have a question for Mike, actually, if that's okay.
Of course, go.
So in my startup, like, past lives, we have done freemium, right? We have done the kind of trial piece, and it's never been super successful. But I'm just thinking, if you forget about it as like a price, like a tier in the pricing, and you actually just use it as marketing, is that a better way of looking at doing kind of free trials and freemium models? Is just as a marketing play?
I don't think it can be just a marketing play. I think it is by definition, I think, a pricing lever.
I think you're right. It's a definition. It's a pricing thing. You do see some products, I think like Dropbox and stuff when they launch, where like community is a driver of acquisition. So if you have a freemium product, it can actually help you to scale with low cost. There's that angle to it sometimes, I think. But yeah, look, great point though. Look, let's change track slightly. I want to bring Ramli in. As we mentioned at the start, he has written a book on onboarding in B2B SaaS in product. He's writing another book about it, has a newsletter about it, which has got 14,000, I think, subscribers. So I'd just love to get your take, Ramli, on the importance of onboarding and why it is so important in the B2B SaaS sector for driving growth.
Yeah, I think there's building on what Mike and Claire and what we've been talking about. When people think about those freemium and free trials, they're coming in as part of an evaluation process. So they're not fully bought in. They're coming in, users are coming in, they're like, is this product right for me? Will this product change my life? Will it change the way I do my things? You made some promises on your website. You made some promises on your ads. Wherever the first touch point is, there's a certain level of perception that has been built up in that very first touch point. And now onboarding is about making that into a reality, making that promise, giving them the promise and fulfilling it, getting them, to put it into metaphor, bringing them to the promised land. There's no levers that can fix the value gap or the perception gap. And talking about how important it is, there's a ton of data from Profitwell, from Salesforce, other places where if you get that first impression right, it has huge impacts in terms of longer term retention. We know that intuitively as humans, as business people, that when you meet somebody for the first time, that first impression, that first 15 seconds with somebody, you're gonna figure out right away if you're gonna be friends with them, or you're gonna work with them, or they're gonna be your partner, whether that's in a business sense or a life sense. And if it turns out to be a bad first impression, it's hard to undo that. And that's the same with products, where if we do see a great experience, it does leave a lasting impression. And like I said, the data from Profitwell shows that if somebody has a great onboarding experience from that first day, it turns into like a 2 to 3 times higher retention later down in 9 weeks, based on the data they did around B2B SaaS. So it's really important, not just for retention, but in other places too, because we know retention is the key to long-term growth.
100%, yeah, that's great. I love that. And I think you see in a lot of other sectors as well, like through audience research, I think a lot of brands make a mistake in thinking that when they've acquired a customer, when they signed up to that subscription, that the customer sold, right, and they're all in. And you mentioned it already, like they're not. They're just warmer, and they're still evaluating you, and they're still trying to assess whether the promises are true, right? So yeah, like it's hugely important, as you say, to get those first impressions right, and dive into that a little bit more, Claire. You've got a newsletter as well. I'm a subscriber. Great content. You've got over a decade of experience in onboarding as well. I'd love to get your take on why onboarding is so important.
Yeah, I might be a bit biased, but I definitely think that the onboarding phase is the most important phase of the customer life cycles, especially in B2B SaaS. Just to echo what Ramli said, it is, even though they get to the point of they've purchased and they are getting set up, it's such a critical and delicate phase of the life cycle. And in B2B SaaS specifically, it's so much more intricate. It's not just one person that has decided they want to buy an app and they've purchased it and then they want to play around with it themselves. Often I have done onboarding where end users turn up to the first call and they say, I have no idea what this tool is. I just got told I had to be on this call. And so straight away, you're back into reselling the value, reselling to this individual end user why it's going to be beneficial to them. So even before I've even talked about training or like getting them set up on a product, I'm into a mode of making sure that every single stakeholder, and often with B2B SaaS, it's enterprise clients, which means multiple levels of stakeholders, which means everyone's got a different view on what value is. Everyone has a different view on what success looks like. Everyone has a different view on what is important to do that day. And so the biggest thing for me is change management and making sure you've got that figured out, which we can go into later. But I feel like if you can nail onboarding, then everything sort of slots in, everything falls into place, because not only do you have easier conversations around revenue, expansion, upsells, whatever those are, you also have champions, you have advocates who will happily give you a referral and a case study and anything else that will help you get some more leads in. That's before you even get to retention and renewal, which of course will be impacted by it as well. But I think one of the things that maybe is a negative that people struggle with, that I've seen people struggle with, is B2B SaaS, often an annual contract. So it's usually a year before you see the impact of onboarding on a retention conversation.
Yeah.
And I've seen onboarding blamed a lot of times for churn, which I think there are ways to go around, fixing that. But I do think it's one of those pieces of the puzzle, the SaaS puzzle, that everyone knows it's important. But whether they invest time, money, resource into it, it often gets kind of nudged down the list behind sales, behind marketing, because they're trying to fill the top of funnel. But the reality is, if you can put that time and investment into onboarding, you're gonna see the results tenfold.
100%, fully agree with that. I've seen that. Fully agree with your point about onboarding being the kind of number one life stage for retention as well. Like for long-term retention, you see it, like a lot of like B2C businesses have like a 50% churn curve in the first 90 days, right? So you can get that right. It's explosive for growth. Actually, I was just thinking then, I was slightly going off track on the on what we talked about in terms of the script, but do you see like you took one of the things you said then was talking about how different people within an organization, like at an enterprise level, have different expectations of what should be done on any given day. I think also I've seen like in Martech particularly like completely different like understanding of like the expectation of time to value, like how long it's going to take, like between like what the C-suite think or whoever's signed the check versus the guy on the ground doing the dev or doing the integrations that are required in order to make it work. Like how do you manage that, like as a customer success pro, and how do you navigate that so that everybody is successful and gets what they want out of the program? What in your experience, what were your tips on that?
Well, all of that comes down to change management. And I think one of the things that I like to tell people to really focus on at the beginning is understanding how your solution is going to disrupt their workflow, their current existing workflow, and do it from the individual stakeholder viewpoint. So if you don't kind of cover that piece, then you're going to piss some people off. And it's going to be really hard to kind of work your way back up from that. And so I think it's a case of I'm going to go into a company and I'm going to understand exactly who all are all of the people involved in this web that are going to be impacted in some way. It might not be that they use the product, but maybe they're the person that has to handle the integration, or it's all of these kind of puzzle pieces to pull together so that you are implementing a solution for them that they know they need, but you're going to try and do it as painlessly as possible. And that is how you get these individuals on board. If you don't make it painful for them and you understand why it's important for them and how it's going to benefit them and help them realize it. A lot of the time, stakeholders maybe will tell you, yeah, we need this because we need to make more money, or we need this because we're spending too much time on it. It's such a throwaway comment, and you can't build any value from that. You can't. It's so hard in onboarding and CS in general to go, okay, well, I think we saved you time. Do you want to renew? And they go, no. Like that happens so much if you take that surface level answer.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's important to not take that first answer. Really kind of go, okay, so what does that mean? Like, what do you mean when you want to save time? And if they give you another answer, and you kind of just keep digging until you go, okay, now I understand the reason why you've purchased this and how it's going to impact you as an individual. Now I can action that in terms of how I'm going to help you realize that as quickly as possible.
Perfect.
But you know what? Like, I'd love to take that and just jump off it. That's something that Claire made me think of. Like, retention is everyone's job, right? It's true whether you're in B2C or B2B. And I think retention in onboarding, we're like cultivating seeds planted by the acquisition team or not. I think in the case of like what Claire was just saying, like imagine how much easier that would be if we were working more closely with sales teams so that they were prepping customers about, the uses of the product in a more effective way. And I think that's something that I've always tried to do, like both working as a fractional CMO, but also as a consultant, is like making sure that marketing and sales are talking effectively together so that process is easier.
Old problem, isn't it? Alignment of sales and marketing.
And there's also the stakeholders. I think like who Claire was talking about, like you gotta know who all the stakeholders are, who the buyer is, who the end users are, and sales knows that, right? And often that doesn't get handed off to the customer onboarding team or the account management team, and now you're asking the same questions that sales ask. It sounds like a broken telephone, and that's not a great experience. If I was a buyer, like I already answered one of your team members, did you not talk to them? Then that's like kind of breaks trust from a customer point of view, and not a great first impression or experience if that was the case there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, totally agree with that. So beyond like misalignment between sales and marketing and expectation management with clients at different levels within the organization, is there anything else that you guys want to come in on, and what makes or breaks retention in that early life period in the B2B SaaS context?
So I have a debate about this topic with so many people, and I think it's a really healthy debate because there are some variables. But I personally think that you should have a dedicated onboarding team that handles this most important part of the life cycle. We so often see it as a task that CSMs have to do, but they're so pulled in so many different directions and they have so many things going on and their targets are very revenue focused. And so they're obviously going to put that higher than, oh, I think we should spend some time iterating on our onboarding process, because the ROI is so hard to measure in terms of that time that you would spend on it. Whereas if you have a dedicated team, it's their job to make that experience world class and to keep that level of satisfaction for an experience for that customer high during that period. And again, I think I'm a bit biased because I focus on it so much, but I also had the experience in a startup, which I think was super unusual. I was like employee number 10 and we had 2 CSMs and we split out onboarding and I ran onboarding. We had 1 CSM and then I was running onboarding, and it gave us the opportunity to experiment, have the license to experiment and actually make it an incredible experience. Our CSAT was always through the roof, and the impact of that handing over to CS and then handing over to account management and then through to renewal was really obviously impacted by that onboarding experience.
Everything else is a lot easier when they have great onboarding. Ramli, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, it's actually something fascinating I'm seeing teams do around that, where they're building digital customer success teams or scaled customer success teams to own that onboarding. I know at AppUse, where I previously worked at, that was a function they were starting to build before I left last year, in companies like Full Story and other companies, where they're like, you're right, what Claire mentioned is like, if nobody owns that fully, then what happens is like pieces of it gets owned by everybody, which if everybody owns it, nobody owns it, right? I was like, oh, marketing's in charge of onboarding emails and customer success is in charge of one-on-one, and sales is in charge of closing it and handing it off, and marketing's in charge of making sure that the positioning and messaging is right. And if there's no one team that's like the quarterback or the coach essentially of it, then it becomes it falls through the crack potentially.
100%. Yeah, totally. Did you want to come in on that, Mike?
The only thing I would add is I think we talk a lot about onboarding the product, but I think it's important to onboard like the whole proposition, and that includes some of the brand messaging, because that in itself can actually be a good retention lever. I have an example. Like I got kind of shat on Canva earlier, so I'll use them again, because I do think that they do this well. So like they talk about product in their onboarding, and actually the onboarding experience is in the product. So it's like it's pop-ups, and they link to benefits, but they link to benefits back to their proposition strategy. For example, like one of their premium features is to connect with data from external sources. Like you can connect to like the World Bank database and create like visuals based on the data that comes from there, which is very, very cool, right? But that is a product feature that's only available for certain users who pay a premium. And so, but by telling me about that, effectively they built in not only a mechanism for deeper engagement, but also for upsell, which is exactly what onboarding should be doing in ideal worlds.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it feels like a good point for Ramli to come in on product onboarding.
Totally agree. I think I didn't even know Canva has that connected to the World Bank.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
I was like, oh, shoot. They didn't onboard me to. I'm a customer, so I didn't even know that's something that they had on its own.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I would say that, totally agree with what Mike said. That going back to what I mentioned, onboarding starts before. It should start before they sign up for the product. They should start before they even see the product, because like to what he said, I really love how you phrased it. You're onboarding them to a message. I mentioned earlier, like you're onboarding them to a new way of life, like a transformation, and they have to be bought in to that. They have to see that, and like I mentioned earlier, like now the product's role once they get in is, and even the whole team is, how do we get them to see that and experience that in as quickly as possible. That could involve humans. It could involve a customer onboarding team. It could involve product as well. So if it's more self-serve, how do we guide them through that experience, figuring out the right kind of levers, whether that's videos or tours, or every product is different, every user is different. So understanding, will they hate tours? Because some people hate tours, right? And some people love them. Will they prefer short videos or GIFs? And that's where the whole experimentation we were talking about in is like trying to figure out the right kind of mix of educational path to guide them to that value, or the aha moment, or to that promised completion or experience, or that ultimate win is how you're gonna win in the long term.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it reminds me actually of it's about 10 years old. I think the case study bit of HubSpot, when they originally their onboarding was essentially CSMs, like you said, Claire. Everybody get in a room, listen to hours and hours of presentations and product demos. Everyone gets bored, leaves the room, does something else. These days, if it was on Teams, that have been chatting with someone else, forgets it all. And then they kind of supplemented that with all of the product experience content and little videos throughout the product, help educate customers as they're actually using the content, the product in context, and then supplemented that with the human interaction as well, right, for the right people at the right moment with the right content. So, and they saw big lifts in LTV and value. Yeah, John Warrilow talks a lot about that case study. But staying in onboarding, I want to just ask a question about organizational alignment. Like Ramli and Claire particularly, you talked about that. How do you drive organizational alignment when everyone has individual departmental goals and objectives to hit? Like Claire, maybe starting with you on that one.
How do you drive organizational alignment? Yeah, I think I may have already kind of touched on this a bit, so I don't want to try not to repeat myself too much. But for onboarding specifically, I can't effectively create an onboarding program, and I'm coming from a non-self-serve, more of like a hand-holding one-on-one kind of onboarding, which is different to Ramli. But my experience has always been, I need to make sure I don't make any assumptions, make sure that I understand, as I've already said, the stakeholder goals, the value. And then in that kind of discovery process that you have, which is, I think, maybe a point to make, that maybe people make an assumption that you don't need to do discovery in onboarding because it's been done in sales. It's a very different kind of discovery. I think it's much more integrated into their workflows, right? You don't need to know so much of that in sales, but you need to know that in onboarding. So I need to go in, I need to understand who's who. I need to understand the impact on each individual person. I need to understand who are going to be the blockers. Is there anyone that is going to potentially derail the flow of onboarding? Yeah, it could. I mean, and it could be for so many different reasons. And I think that's why it's so important to get under the hood with it all and actually challenge people. And it doesn't have to be in a way that scares people, but just kind of ask questions like, are you sure about that? I just need, I'm here as a partner for you in onboarding. I'm not trying to sell you anything. That's already happened. I'm trying to make sure that this is worth your while. So setting that tone with customers, I think they appreciate it. They want it. They need it at that point. And so I'm going to try my best to uncover any sort of cracks, any sort of issues that are on the customer side that they might not be aware of. But if I start to see it, that's where I'm going, okay, I need to now help you. I need a plan to help you manage this for your team before we even get stuck into my side of things. And I feel like it's quite an ad hoc thing. It's different in every company. And you just have to be able to have those soft skills of investigation.
Yes. Like being a detective.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, find the detractors, find the points of friction, right? Ramli, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I would just building on that, and not just finding those detractors, but actually also finding your champions who are willing to kind of like champion your product or service. I can give an example, and I'm giving it as a consultant, but this applies so much to software products. I was recently working with a company as a consultant. I was brought in to help fix their product onboarding experience. After about 3 months in, my champion, the person I was like talking with and kind of working with, was let go because of restructuring. And guess what? After that month, I didn't renew my service, and because I lost the champion who was championing me internally, what Ramli can do and what he can bring, and that applies so much to software as well. Where if you have a champion, identify that, because they will kind of help shepherd the, I don't want to say sheep, but help shepherd the team together to kind of like understand the value, and kind of see why we should be using this, and how do we get this all together, kind of have even a shared language around this, and kind of like nurturing that relationship. I think when it comes to change management, the mistake people often think is like, let's just change everybody, right? But you just got to find one or two people who believe it, they see it, they get the results, and now they can evangelize it, as to like, here's what we got. If it's a sales product, because of this, I work less hours and I'm closing more deals. And the other sales team will be like, what? I want to work less hours and close more deals. And now they can truly champion that internally, rather than trying to push a rock up a mountain. Find your team, your champions.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think you find the champions, and also when you, like the example you use, when you start to see things working, success has many fathers, right? So you can bring people and others. It can bring people with you in terms of the product, not just the champion, but also the demonstration of success from the usage of that product. What's your take, Mike?
Yeah, so it's something was running through my head about like, I love the idea of a common language. I have a story about this as well. It's like kind of less of a comment, but just as a proof point to what Claire and Ramli were saying. But before I tell that, I think it's important. Like I'm training to be an accountant as like a supplement to my consultancy, and it's actually funny because like when you're training to be an accountant, it's a completely different perspective about like why businesses exist. Like as marketers, we think primarily about the customer, right? That's not how finance see it at all. And I think it's been really interesting to come at that training with that perspective. And I think it's a good reminder for people, like, remember that you're literally talking a foreign language, and that's why it's so important to have this common ground. My story is an example of where I didn't have that. So I've been working with a client recently, and it was actually about building out their onboarding, and presented the program to the CEO, and like they just didn't get it, did not understand why it was the way it was. It was a disaster of a meeting. Basically, I lost sleep over how bad it was. But the reason that it went so badly is because we just didn't have that common language. There was no understanding of the value of retention. There was no understanding of like the mechanics, all the stuff we've just talked about, like, and why it is important. And so, I think it's so important to work with your champions, as Ramli said, find that common language that Claire said as quickly as possible, particularly when you're just starting a new role, or, if you're a consultant watching this, like as a consultant, it's important to do that. And just get the work out there, like, but it's not going to happen unless you have that kind of common understanding first.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. Look, changing track slightly, we're going to go to the top of the pyramid of the retention hierarchy of needs. So I write a lot about moments of truth as being key to success in retention. Obviously talked a lot about onboarding. We can talk more about onboarding, but I'd love to get your take, maybe Claire, on what you think are the retention moments of truth to be aware of in the B2B SaaS space.
I'm going to go straight into onboarding. So in onboarding specifically, we talk about the time to value metric. It's like the number one metric that people always talk about. You have to measure this in onboarding. But in my experience, it can be a little bit restrictive. I think people can get stuck on it as a metric and not really know the value of the metric.
To calculate it, do you mean, like how to understand time to value?
So I think most people will go, okay, I'm going to, I don't know, there's like an action that they have to do in a product, and that means that they've got value. Or it's something quite like specific and small that is kind of used as, yep, they've got value, they're going to renew. Like that's kind of, I'm exaggerating, but that's the kind of thought process around it. But as I was saying earlier about the multiple stakeholders and differing ideas of what value is, I think it's super important to have that as the measure of how this is going to be a long-term retention strategy, not just a nice metric that we have. It needs to be of an overarching metric, and it needs to encompass all the different stakeholders. And then only when you've got all of those things lined up, can you say, okay, they have reached value. That's something we can build on.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Ramli, what's your take on what are the key moments of truth in retention? And I'm going to guess you're going to talk about onboarding as well.
I'm gonna cheat a little bit, and yeah, I would say it a little bit past also that moment of value. I think a lot about forming habits, like habit forming experiences, and often when we think about habits, getting to do something once, like let's say I'm trying to build a habit around drinking more water every day. If I do it once, like that's not a habit. Studies show you have to do it like multiple times, maybe 30 days, something like that. And that's something also I take a look at is like not repetition. So how often do they repeat that specific action, that value action, value moment, whatever that is, and also velocity. So how often do they do it, but how long in the gap between the two? So if it takes them too long, then that could be for me a red flag potentially, where it's an early indicator that they did it once, they didn't like it, they didn't get it, right? They did like if we're talking about, let's say Calendly, or go back to Canva with that example, they created design, downloaded it, they didn't come back. So okay, what happened? Did they not like the design? Did they not use it? For me, I want them to come in and download 2 or 3 times, and kind of get them to build that habit around that. And repetition is the key to habit formation, and habit formation is a good indicator to retention, because they're building workflows and kind of attaching your product to a specific problem in their mind or a need. And once that's attached, it's much harder to kind of move away from that.
Yeah, definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And then maintaining that out of onboarding as well into BAU. Yeah, Mike, what's your take?
I think it's like first engagement.
Yeah.
Like so. If we're still talking about SaaS products post trial, this is the first time a customer uses the product once they've moved into paying full price.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're on a step price. But I think it's really important, right? So they've got they have full access. They're getting all the benefits of not only the product but the proposition. And I think businesses could do more to celebrate this moment. Certainly not only to solidify the and reinforce the value of that very first engagement, because as Ramli says, it leads to better habits, hopefully. But also because it helps to create a moment of psychological importance for the customer.
Yeah.
As an anchor.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, perfect. So we're coming to the end. I've got one more question. I want to make it a tradition. This is only the second episode of this podcast, but I want to make it a tradition that we ask the guests to share their number one retention tip. And so I'd love to do the same with you guys. Maybe we'll start with Mike. What is your number one retention tip for those working in B2B SaaS?
This was a difficult one, to answer. I think it's really hard to whittle it down. I'm sure the other guests think the same, but all the stuff I think we talked about is like, you can kind of sum it up with like proactivity, but I feel like for SaaS in particular, and Claire touched on this a little bit as well, actually, I think, so did Ramli, but like, I don't think everything should be digital. Some of the most in B2B SaaS of the companies that I've worked for, we've seen better results from having both an online and offline journey than having just an online journey or just an offline journey for that matter. So I would say, like, remember that there is a whole world outside of the digital sphere. And even though building relationships online is vital to protect profit, building them IRL, like in real life, it adds a multiplier to your efforts that's really difficult to quantify, but is in my view, even more important.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. What's your take, Claire?
Well, I have talked a lot about most of them, I think, like the top tips already. So I'm going to try and pick a slightly different one for this. I think for onboarding specifically, you have to do everything you can to make it really hard to rip out your solution from their workflow and from their ecosystem. And you do that by delivering value quickly, by catering to all the stakeholders, by making sure that all of their kind of success metrics that they point out have been met in onboarding. Onboarding lengths vary, but it's the prime time to be, as soon as you hand it over to someone else who's going to take it on, or it might be yourself that carries on, but like as soon as it moves out of the onboarding phase, you want them to be in a position where they're seeing value, they're being successful, there's no question that they bought the right solution, and actually it's going to be really painful to take it out of their now integrated workflow that you have put some effort into. So I think if you can get to that stage, then it really solidifies that you technically have got it all working really well, and it's down to like the people perspective, as Mike was saying, for the rest of the life cycle.
Yes. Okay, perfect. And Ramli, what's your number one tip for those working in B2B SaaS from a retention perspective?
Yeah, it's something that we kind of touch upon in this episode, that churn and retention is not a customer success problem. It's not a product problem. It's actually a business problem that needs to be tackled by a unified team. And the reason why I bring that up, and I see this all the time with companies who say their product led is the biggest barrier, they say, to onboarding or to adoption or retention, is often for product friction. But that's not often the reality. It's often human resistance. So customers having struggles trying to get that champion, or identifying the barriers to that. It's also human resistance internally, where teams are not working internally together to try to tackle key moments in that journey. You call it as moments of truth. Like, you can't identify all the moments of truth and figure out where they're falling off if you only have a fraction of the view or the image. If you don't have a holistic point of view and see the whole journey of that customer, then you won't be able to kind of figure out exactly where they might be losing. You might be losing them. So I'd say it takes a unified team to truly tackle retention problems.
Perfect. Awesome. So product market fit, onboarding, obviously, we talked most of the time about onboarding as being absolutely critical. Organizational alignment, delivering the best possible experience for the different customer types, both in terms of product market fit, but also in terms of the onboarding experience. So look, thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your insights today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I'd love to just tell us where we can find you. Ramli, do you want to go?
Yeah, of course. People can find me on LinkedIn, Ramli John. You mentioned I'm writing a new book. It's coming out in June 2025. People can check that out at eurekabook.co. Eureka,
right? The book. Yeah, perfect. Claire?
Yeah, also can find me on LinkedIn, Clare Knight, with no I in the Claire. Often get that wrong. And also subscribe to the newsletter. It goes out every week. It's called The Onboarding Lab. It's at theonboardinglab.com. And yeah, every week a new kind of tip, a new project goes out to help people improve their onboarding. So it's worth subscribing.
Awesome. And Mike?
customervalueguy.com. And of course, I am also on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everyone. I appreciate that. It's a great conversation, lots of insights for folk. And I think not just for those in B2B SaaS, right? I think there's a lot of people that work in retention more generally that can take a lot of value from that conversation. So massively appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.